Dear guests, kindly make sure that your mobile phones are switched off or are set on silent mode, please. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of His Excellency Professor Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi, the Director General of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, we would like to welcome you this evening to a lecture titled The Gulf and Japan's Indo-Pacific Strategy, delivered by Mr. Kunihiko Miyake, a Research Director for Foreign and National Security Affairs at Canon Institute for Global Studies in Japan. Mr. Kunihiko Miyake is the President of the Foreign Policy Institute, which is a private think tank in Tokyo, a Research Director for Foreign and National Security Affairs at Canon Institute for Global Studies, and a visiting professor at Ritsumeikan University. In 2006-2007, he was executive assistant to Mrs. Aki Abe in the office of the Prime Minister of Japan. Mr. Miyake passed the Foreign Service Officers exam, which is the senior class exam, in 1977 and joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1978. From 1978 until 2005, he served in several positions at the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which included and not limited to Deputy Director General of the Middle East Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Minister at the Embassy of Japan in Iraq and Japan's representative to the CPA, Chargé d'Affaires at the Embassy of Japan in Iraq, and Minister at the Embassy of Japan in China. And now we would like to welcome Mr. Miyake to deliver his lecture. Sir, the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أيها سيداتي وسادتي اسمي كوني مياكي كنت دبلوماسي ياباني في سفارة اليابان أيضا في وزارة الخارجية اليابانية. أنا درست عربي في القاهرة لمدة سنتين بين 79 و 81 وأنا شغلت في بغداد القاهرة وطوكيو وواشنطن وبيجين. But that's all I can say in Arabic. بالنسبة لأنا للغة العربية أنا نسيتها كاملا. لهذا السبب أنا آسف جدا لازم أتكلم باللغة الإنجليزية اليوم. شكرا. But yes, it's a great honor. It's a great honor to be invited here, and I don't want to be seated because my presentation time is limited, only 30 minutes, and I'd like to share with you how I see the world with the probably metaphor of the Star Wars, probably later today. Things have changed. On June 12 in Singapore, President of the United States met with Mr. Kim Jong-un, something like this. No. This is a Lookalikes, and this is the real one. This is the real one. But what has changed since that date, or even before? Things have started to change a bit earlier, and I say things have started to change in 2016. This is the 7 leaders in the G7 countries. They gathered in Japan. And the year 2016 is the year when Mr. Obama visited the city of Hiroshima. That was a very moving occasion, but that is not the issue today. See, out of those, out of those 7 leaders, 4 are already gone. See, who disappeared first? Mr. Cameron, because of the Brexit, as you know. Then, Mr. Obama is gone because he served 8 years. Anyway, it's okay. Mr. Lindsay is gone. He lost the national referendum. He tried to amend the Constitution, and he failed. And he's gone. French president is gone. Why? Then he is Mr. Todo Jr. That means only Shinzo Abe and Angela Merkel survived those 2 years. Why? And why Mr. Trump was elected in 2016? This is one of the first topic of today's presentation of mine. Mr. Trump, why did he win? We have a representative from the United States, so maybe you know better than I do, but this is the result of the 2016 election. As you know, red ones are Republicans, blue ones are Democrats, but you see nothing in here. So I'd like to compare the result of 2016 with the result of 2012, like this. If we put the United States, divide the United States into two, on the western side, please take a look at it. Western side is basically the same. Look at the south. Except for Florida, the result is the same. Out of 50 states, 44 states results are the same. So the only differences are Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And excluding Florida, those states are all near the Great Lakes, industrial area, the Rust Belt area. And those white, male, uneducated workers were extremely angry. They thought that they were forgotten, and unfortunately, they are not happy. So they're angry, and they elected Mr. Trump. Why they are angry? Simple. In 1970, the white people are the great, great majority, but by 2050, as you see, the minorities will be the majority. This is the fear of the white people, some of them at least. And there are another reason. Look, the average income-wise, Asian Americans is the top. And second is the European white Americans, but the Hispanic and blacks are catching up. So I use the word dark side. What is the dark side? Dark side is the unhealthy, ugly populism, nationalism, xenophobism, and discriminatory, destructive human sentiment. They have elected Mr. Trump. So Mr. Trump is not the reason for that. Mr. Trump was a result of that. Mr. Trump was a symptom of that. And that is not an US phenomenon. Remember, who was the first G7 leader who disappeared? Mr. Cameron. Why? Because of the Brexit, and simply because the Brexit is the United Kingdom's dark side. So he failed to control it. It's very unfortunate, but then what happened to France? What happened to Italy? What happened to Poland, Hungary, or Sweden, wherever, and even in Germany. So Mrs. Merkel is leaving. So why they have to leave, and why Shinzo Abe stayed? This is the how I see the world. So, in order to explain to you what's happening in the world, I like to use the metaphors of the Star Wars movies. Okay, I know this is a violation of the intellectual property rights, but don't tell anybody that I use these slides, okay? This left poster, it says the Force awakens. There's a recent Star Wars movie, but I don't say the Force awakens. I say the dark side awakens. It awakened in the States, it awakened in Europe, it's awakening in Asia, and even in my country. So it is not that whether or not we have dark side in your country. The question is whether or not your leaders can control the dark side or not. That's the most important point of the first movie. Second is, it's in the middle. The Empire Strikes Back. I don't say the Empire Strikes Back. I say the Empires, plural, strike back. Why? Well, those empires see the status quo as unjust. And because it is unjust, it should be changed, they believe. And then eventually they say, well, it can be changed. And it can be changed by force. So what the Russians are doing on the ground in Europe, and what the Chinese are doing in the South China Sea, and what the Iranians are doing in the Middle East, and what maybe Turkey might do, they are the empires strike back, in my view. Thirdly, this is the phantom menace called. I don't say phantom menace. We have the nuclear menace. And as you know, the nuclear weapons are being manufactured and developed and manufactured in North Korea. I don't think they're going to give them up. And what about Iranians? You never know. So this is how I see the world. So all in all, in a nutshell, it's not that return of the Jedi. It's not. It's the return of nationalism. Nationalism, populism, xenophobism, discriminatory sentiment, destructive sentiment of the human being is prevailing all over the world, including the Middle East, in my view. I don't know how to explain. It's slightly different, seemingly slightly different political phenomena, but I think at the at the bottom of the issue, probably they are the same. The angry, forgotten people are not happy with the existing establishment, and they are not happy and they revolted. So if that's the case, how can we survive? This is the next question, but we go on. I only have, 28 minutes. I have more time. But still time is limited. I like to show you the history of China of about 2,000 years in 21 seconds. That's the only thing I can do today. The red part is not communist China. This is Han Chinese China. This is, sorry, I used the Chinese characters, but this is 2nd century BC, okay? And the red Han Chinese are basically, historically, surrounded by 4 barbarians. Barbarians in the north, barbarians in the east, barbarians in the south, and barbarians in the west. So, this is the 2nd century BC, and I will show you the ups and downs of the Han Chinese dynasties within 21 seconds. And it's a bit fast, but I want you to take a look at it, okay? Okay, this is 2nd century BC. 2nd century AD, then 5th century, that China became big in Tang Dynasty and shrunk and disappeared. Mongolians came, and Ming Dynasty resurrected. Then the Qing Dynasty came, and Russians came down, Japanese invaded, and China is here. Did you get it? Too fast. Asif jiddan. So make it a little bit slower. Han Chinese had been surrounded by 4 enemies, as I said, in the north, in the east, in the west, and the south. And those northern barbarians, in the 2nd century BC, then 2nd century AD, the yellow marked barbarians in the north, and even the 5th century AD, there's always the main threat came from the north. That's why they built a wall. I'm not talking about Mr. Trump, but that's why they built a wall in the north. However, the 7th century, when the Tang dynasty was born, it was such a powerful dynasty, and they just conquered all the enemies, except for Japan. But this is the second half of the 7th century, but by the 8th century, the Tang dynasty shrank. And this is my favorite map of Tang dynasty or Han Chinese. Look, what shall I say? I don't have the, okay, you don't see it. There's a corridor between the Central Asian part of China, Han Chinese, and the mainland Han Chinese. They call it Zhongyuan. The corridor has been sandwiched by the Uyghurs and Tibetans. This is the strategic vulnerability of the Han Chinese. So then, what's going to happen? This is the 8th century, 11th century, the Han Chinese shrank, got smaller, simply because those barbarians got stronger. So China is not always on the rise. China is not always becoming bigger and bigger. Sometimes it shrinks whenever the barbarians got stronger. And then, what? The 12th century, the yellow one is Manchurians. Manchurians came, so the Han Chinese occupies only the southern half of the small territories. Then they disappear because Mongolians came in and took over in the 13th century. But then again, the 15th century Ming dynasty, the Han Chinese dynasty, resurrected. Those are the good old days, but at the same time, see, it's written in Japanese, but the Tataris, or Uyghurs, the Tibetans all came back. Then the 17th century, the Manchurians came back and occupied the whole China as Qin dynasty. And then, probably at the end of the 19th century, as you see, Russians came down and took Vladivostok. And then the 20th century, we invaded, and now it is the present China. What can you learn from those maps? What can you learn from those histories of dynasties? You see, as you see, it's funny that the land border of China, as I see, is safe now. You see, who are the northern barbarian of China today? Russians. Well, Russians are not a threat anymore to the Chinese. And they took Inner Mongolia, they took Tibet, and they took Uyghur area, and where else? Who are the enemy of China from the south? Indians? No. There are high mountains dividing them, Himalayas. So there'll be no threat from India. The biggest threat came from Vietnam, in my view. The last war between China and Vietnam was in 1979, and China couldn't win. But after that, there has been no war. There's no land border war. until now. So that means what? The land borders of China has been secure, at least for decades by now. So why? Because the borders are safe. Why do you spend so much money on defense? Why do they buy more weapons? It's simple. You know why? Because the threat doesn't come from the ground. The threat comes from the sea. As you see, the most prosperous and vulnerable China is located on the coast, facing the Pacific, from Tianjin, Beijing, down to Canton and Hong Kong. And the challenges come from the United States and Japan, from the sea. That's why they are building aircraft carriers. So this is the reality. This is my view of China in a historical perspective. So now you are talking about one road, one belt and one road. I don't know what it means. I'm not interested because if you talk about the roads and railways on the Eurasian continent, please go ahead if you want. I don't care because Belt and Road Initiative, in my view, I may be wrong, of China is a compilation of existing projects, dreams, ideas, maybe hopes, but it's not necessarily going to fly because you need investment from the private sector. And if it's lucrative and it's profitable, they have already done that. But it's not flying, it's not taking off simply because it's not economically feasible. So I'm not worried about the land area, but I am worried about the water areas. Sorry again, this is written in Japanese, but you see red two lines. The left-hand side is the first island chain, they call it, from southern Kyushu to Okinawa, Taiwan, the Philippines, and most of the South China Sea. They drew a line as the first island chain, and they claim that those waters inside the first island chain is Chinese. We cannot accept that. In addition to that, the Chinese military officers say, well, there's a second island chain starting from Tokyo to Guam all the way down to the Papua New Guinea. This is a second island chain, and eventually, maybe by 2030s or 2040s, you never know, those water areas inside the second island chain should be controlled by the Chinese. That means, simply put, Americans get back to Hawaii. That's the message. And this is not acceptable to us. Why? Because as you see, the blue lines, that's the 3 lines of communication for Japan, from Tokyo all the way through the Straits, all the way through the Indian Ocean to the Gulf, to Abu Dhabi. And those 2 red lines, the first and second island chains, unfortunately block our 3 lines of communication, which should be open to everybody. So the first and second island chains virtually deny the freedom of navigation in the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean in the long run. That's how I see the world. This is the map of the picture of the movement of goods going to and coming from Tokyo. And as you see, the South China Sea, East China Sea is the busiest traffic area. And I have to say something about the, what was that? Indo-Pacific what? Strategy? Although it was sort of invented by the Japanese Prime Minister and also imitated by the US government, but I don't know what it means. it says this: free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, Japan will enhance connectivity between Asia and Africa, blah, 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 blah. I don't know what it means, okay? So please don't quote me because I do not know. But I give you my analysis of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy in 3 ways. One, from the military point of view. As you may know, there is a military command called Pacific Command in Honolulu. Now they call themselves Indo-Pacific Command, but it used to be PACOM, Pacific Command. The mission of the Pacific Command has been, from the beginning, not only the Western Pacific, but also covering the Indian Ocean. So the US PACOM has been in the Pacific since the 1950s. So no change. Whether you change your name or not, the PACOM, the US Pacific Command, Indo-Pacific Command, has been protecting the sea lines of communication all the way down to the mouth of the Gulf. Then the Fifth Fleet will take care of that, the rest, inside the Gulf. So without the Seventh Fleet and Fifth Fleet, our sea lines of communication won't be protected. This is how I see the world. From the economic point of view, yes, those locks, sea lines of communication between Tokyo and Abu Dhabi is one. It is one. You see, we buy, you sell, we export, you import, or you export, we import. This is one. We are linked. And I always say this. I hope I won't offend anybody, but probably if you go to Washington, D.C., you will meet a group of Middle East hands, wherever in Washington. And those people do not know Asia. And when I go to Washington, D.C., I will meet with a bunch of Asia hands who know nothing about the Middle East. And they don't talk to each other in Washington. They do not know each other. They do not know what they are doing each other. This is unbelievable, but this is my experience. I've been visiting Washington for the past 40 years. There have never been a single sort of a joint conference on the Middle East and East Asia. Middle East and East Asia. Middle East, East Asia. Middle East, East Asia. Middle East Asia. Middle East Asia is a one theater of operation. It's not separated. It's one. We are on the same boat, and without you, we suffer, and without us, you suffer. This is the interdependence relationship. It's the Middle East Asia concept. So what I want you to understand today is that you are not only in the Middle East, but part of the Middle East Asia one theater of operation. And we are in the same boat, and we have to work together. This is how I see the world. From the political point of view, yes, it's something new. There's something new, because we're trying to incorporate India and Africa in that concept. But make no mistake, we have no intention to contain China. You see, because China is too big to contain. No country can contain it. Even the United States cannot contain it. Unfortunately, but still, China is, I'm afraid, trying to change the status quo, if necessary by force. And that's not something we can accept. Our strategy is more maritime than continental. Let's move on. This is a map of Korea, and I'd like to say something about Korea because I have 12 more minutes to go. From the geopolitical point of view, this is the Korean Peninsula of the 8th or 9th century. And Korean Peninsula is so small, and eastern side is mountainous. The western side is, okay, you can use it. So there are many, many nations in the world. Some are happier, some are more miserable. But it's a pity that the Korean Peninsula is one of the most unhappy nations on the earth. Why? Because they have been unluckily surrounded by three terrible neighbors: Manchurians, Chinese, and Japanese. Because of the size of the Korean Peninsula, there's no strategic depth in there. So that means the Koreans have to survive. And the best way is to paying tribute to the most powerful neighbor at that time. That's what they've been surviving, unfortunately. So the balancing is always their strategy. And I want you to take a look at this. This is not Mr. Tillerson, okay? This is Mr. Hudson of the United States. He was the Secretary of State in 1950, January. He gave a terrible speech in the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. He said, this defense perimeter runs, etc. Oh, I show you the map. This perimeter runs along the Aleutians all the way to Okinawa, Ryukyus. And most importantly, so far as the military security is concerned, it must be clear that no person can guarantee those areas against military attack. That means the Secretary of State of the United States in 1950, January, telling the public, telling the world that they defend the areas inside the green line, the Hudson line. Okay? Any problem? Any problem? Yes, it's a big problem. Do you know that? Look, South Korea was not included inside the line. And Taiwan was not inside the line. Okay? If I were the grandfather of Mr. Kim Jong-un, Kim Il-sung, say, oh, Americans don't defend South Korea? Are you sure? Are you sure? Can I take it? Because you don't defend it? Okay, thank you very much. This is the beginning of the Korean War. June 1950, 5 months after the Hudson speech. You see, the United States sent a wrong signal to the North Koreans. Unfortunately, it took us a lot of lives to get to the Armistice Agreement in 1953. 1953 is Armistice Agreement, I call it regime of 1953. 65 years old. Why do I know it? Because I am 65 years old. I was born in 1953, and the regime of 1953 is my age. What does it mean, the regime of 1953? Very unfortunate. The regime of 1953, although it divided the peninsula, Korean Peninsula, it also provided some kind of political stability in which Japan could recover from ashes miraculously after the World War II. The South Koreans could recover, could make the what they call miracle of Hangan, and they came back as a major economic power. And even China could adopt the open door policy so that they could prosper. So in that sense, the regime of 1953 provides the fundamental sort of conditions for the economic prosperity in East Asia. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump doesn't know what he's doing. I'm sorry to say this. His advisors know what they are doing. So he met with Kim Jong-un, as I show, on June the 12th in Singapore. What did he do? Very, very unfortunately, Mr. Trump gave that grandson of Kim Il-sung an excessive, unnecessary international attention and international recognition, so that the North Korean leader, young leader, is almost equal to the level of the US president. That's more than enough, but he might have sent the wrong message to the North Korean leader. I'm afraid to say this, but here we may not be able to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula in a foreseeable future. Unfortunately, the US-North Korea summit in Singapore in June 2018 could have been the beginning of the irreversible nuclear armament of North Korea. That's what I'm worried about. I hope I'm wrong. Finally, I just want you to take a look at this, because I have 5 more minutes to go. This is a map of the movements of US Maritime Forces. There are red dots and blue dots. The red dots represent the US aircraft carrier. This is a map of the week of June 6, 2010, okay? Blue dots represent the US Marine Corps amphibious assault ships. It's something like similar to the aircraft carrier, but it doesn't have catapult device and it doesn't have wires. So that means you can use choppers on it, or you can use Harriers, or you can use F-35B on the deck, but you cannot use F-18 or F-16. But anyway, I just want you to show the movements of those US aircraft carriers and Marines amphibious assault ship. The Americans have 10 aircraft carriers now. They are buying the 11th, but still they have 10 now. And amphibious assault ships, I don't know how many they have, maybe 7 or 8, 9. So put them all together, about 20 carriers, like platforms, are rotating all over the world. I show you the movements of those vessels for the next 9 months, beginning with the week of June 6th until the week of April 10th, 2011. Why 2011 April? Because in March 2011, we have a huge earthquake in eastern Japan, and we suffered from a huge tsunami, we remember. So I show you how they go around. I want you to take a look at the Middle Eastern part, Arabian Sea, and the South China Sea. Please take a look. Okay, this is June 6, 2010. July, August, September, October, and November. Then you have Christmas holidays. Then the New Year came, the earthquake came, and tsunami came. And see, the ships around Japan, this is an Operation Tomodachi, they called. This is an operation to help the Japanese in Tohoku. I want you to take a look at it again. See? July 2010, September November, then you have Christmas holidays, New Year came, and the earthquake came, tsunami came, and the Operation Tomodachi. It's fine, but this is a scary map. Why? Because look, there are 2 aircraft carriers and 2 aircraft carriers in the Korean Peninsula. But look, South China Sea is empty. And this is the maximum they can do at that time. They can use 4 or 8 aircraft carriers, but they cannot continue fighting easily. So this is where we are. This map shows how closely connected we are, Abu Dhabi and Tokyo. We are connected by the waters. And our future is your future. And your future is ours. And we are not interested in the land, as I said. I want nobody interfere with the sea lines of communication, freedom of navigation, all the way from Tokyo down through the South China Sea, Malacca Strait, the Indian Ocean, and the mouth of the Arabian Gulf down to Abu Dhabi. This is what we are. And that concludes my presentation. And I'd like to take questions because it says 0. Okay? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake, for your informative and very interesting lecture, in which you gave us your own perspective of the concept of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, and briefly explored some of the changes that have taken place since the G7 summit in 2016. In addition to that, you shed some lights on the Chinese maritime expansion, which is known as the Belt and Road Initiative, and also shed a light on a new concept of Middle East Asia, as the distance or the divide between the Middle East and Asia continues to diminish while they interact more closely in terms of operations, which allow for less separate or independent regional policies in the near future. Now we open the floor for discussion. Whoever has a question or a comment, please introduce yourself and kindly make sure that your comment or question are brief so that other people from the audience can participate in the discussion.
My name is Dr. Fawzi Hassan. Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture, which has really highlighted the great points and important points to us, and highlighted the strategy of Japan in the Indo-Pacific area, and specifically also in the Middle East. However, Your Excellency, Mr. Miyake, there is actually some drawbacks for the Japanese strategy, because you are focusing too much on relying on the protection of the United States. There is no clear shape of the Japanese identity, not in the Middle East and not also in the Pacific Ocean, which is opposed or which is different from this Chinese strategy, which has very clear fundamentals. They are developing, Chinese are building ports in Pakistan, they are building land routes and the Belt and Road Initiative by China. But for Japan, we don't see a clear strategy for Japan, and therefore we don't see a clear Japanese identity for us in the Middle East, so we can understand what Japan wants. All what we want, all what we know about Japan is that Japan is relying on American protection. What is the strategy of Japan in the Middle East? What are the objectives and incentives of Japan? Of course, we are linked by sea routes, but we don't understand what does Japan want. Thank you very much.
I don't think that you are trying to urge Japan to become a hegemonic power in the Middle East. and be aggressive by gaining ports and facilities in this part of the world and trying to play a game of major powers. We are not that kind of country. We learned a lesson in the World War II, and such aggressive behavior will never be successful. That's the lesson we learned. Okay, you mentioned the Chinese expansion, the taking over of the ports, but it's almost illegally or cheating. Do you think this kind of behavior will continue? I don't think so. I don't think so. As we couldn't continue our behavior in the 30s and 40s. See, so I do not want to compete with any sort of aggressive or competitive powers in the Middle East. Rather, we want stability in that part of the world, as you do. And we like to work with you in our capacity. We are not a military power anymore, and we don't want to be a military power. And we are a peace-loving nation, and we don't want to imitate any Chinese behavior. If that's what you want us to do, probably that's a wrong assumption. We will not do that. But at the same time, if there's any nation in the Middle East which suffer from any unjust, aggressive, or assertive, self-assertive behavior, we are always with you. We are always there and do our best to be of some help, but not primarily with the military means. For us, military means is the last resort. And we don't do that in the Middle East. And that's the reputation we have in this part of the world, and we don't want to destroy our reputation as a peace-loving nation.
My name is Dr. Mindai Al-Afifi. Your Excellency, this is my first time to attend a lecture to be given by a Japanese professor. It was a very wonderful lecture, and we learned a lot from you. But Your Excellency, maybe I have to reiterate part of what my colleague said in his question. Japan is a great partner who lives peacefully among nuclear tycoons. You are saying that you reject Chinese, but we will not accept the Chinese aggressive policy. But how can you say you can reject it? You don't have the power to defend yourself. You don't want to be aggressive in the Middle East. We understand that, but we can say one thing. The Arabs, used to be an empire in the past. We ruled Iran, we ruled Turkey, and we ruled other parts of the world. Maybe the Arabs are weak now, but when when Iraq was invaded, 33 countries invaded Iraq, and they couldn't change anything. For Syria, the entire world is fighting against Syria, but Syria still exists. And Syria used to be the capital of the Arab Umayyad Caliphate, and Baghdad was the caliphate of the Abbasid Empire. So the Middle East is not just a bunch of nations exporting oil. We have our identity, and we cannot accept any occupation by anyone. Israel tried to occupy the Middle East, but Israel is limited to a small area. I have to say this because, sir, I wish you could learn Arabic, and this may be the future of the language of the future. The Indian Ocean, we are holding the gateway to the Indian Ocean, and the Strait of Al-Mandab is part of it, and Hormuz Strait and the Suez Canal. So when the world talks, Arabs should be dealt with respect, because Arabs starting to feel the sense of these nations that want to take revenge on Arabs. Japan used to rule China, but Japan cannot continue as a commercial and business nation. Your Excellency, please allow me to say this. Charles de Gaulle in the 60s, he met the Japanese Prime Minister, and he said, I'm meeting the Prime Minister of the country that is manufacturing transistors. You are very advanced in terms of economy, but can you continue to defend yourself as a peaceful nation? I don't think so. The Road and Belt Initiative launched by China is originally something that was made by the Arabs in the past. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you.
I don't know how to respond because what you have told me is basically agreeable to me, although I couldn't get your point and I couldn't get your question.
He was just commenting.
Commenting. Okay, fine.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for this wonderful lecture. We really learned a lot from you this evening. I have a few quick questions. First, you talked about the anger of the forgotten worldwide. Do you see that the anger of the forgotten in developed and developing nations, will it take the same shape of the protests that we have seen in France in the past few weeks? Will it be faced with in the same way that it was oppressed and suppressed like developing countries? The second point, for the Chinese-Japanese neighborhood, do you believe that we in the Middle East and in Asia in general, we are still focusing about old colonial systems, and that we are victims of old colonial systems? The relationships between Japan and China should be readjusted, and they should forget about the old wars. My third point, what do you mean by the Middle East, and that we are part and parcel with Japan as well? Do you think that we are also the Arab countries in Africa and North Africa, are they also part of this region that you have referred to? And the relationship that is based on sea routes, will it forget about the land mass? Thank you.
Sorry, I might have missed the third point, but I try to do my best to answer your questions. You asked me to forget about the past vis-a-vis China. Is that what you asked me? Is it correct? No? No?
No, I don't mean that. In the field of old colonial game, because whenever relations go bad or come in doubt between Japan and China, the more America can use the role in the region and benefit from it. Thank you.
I don't think that our relationship with China is based on the colonial past. I mean, they are a new nation, and we try to be a good neighbor with China, because they won't move away, we want to move out. So, but at the same time, they are a communist nation. We don't share values with them, and they are different. And they sometimes take advantage of the Japan issues for domestic reasons, domestic political reasons. So we have been dealing with the Chinese continent for almost 2,000 years. And they know us, we know them. And we have ups and downs, we have mistakes, we have good times, we have bad times as well. So the answer to your question is very complicated, because China, I want China to be a member of the responsible international community, regional international community. But it seems to me that they are not trying to do so. Rather, they started threatening our neighbors, especially on the waters. So it takes time to be in good terms with China. But we have been dealing with China for the past 2,000 years, and we will continue to deal with them for the next 2,000 years. So it's a long, long game to play. I don't know whether I fully understood your first question, but I am very much worried about the dark side prevailing in Europe. And that really means anti-Islam, anti-Semitic, xenophobic, discriminatory sentiment coming back to the land of Europe. We thought that we could contain it, but we didn't. So we should do our best to minimize, because it's there and it's still growing. So we have to be able to minimize the ramification of those movements. And we need a collective efforts, and we should be able to contain that kind of dark side mentality. But it will continue for decades, at least 10 or 20 years from now. So it's another long, long game. They will not go away, because whenever Europeans whenever Europeans lose self-confidence, that kind of sentiment comes back. It's my empirical lesson I learned from the European history. So we should be very, very careful in and watching the development in Europe, and that will spread in Asia as well. Then that will come back to the United States, and that will make the entire world much, much worse than before. So I take your point, but it could happen not only in the developed countries, but it could be happening in the developing countries. So it's not whether developed or not. That's not the issue. The issue is the heart and minds of the human being, which is not sometimes strong, sometimes which is vulnerable to such discriminatory sentiments. Thank you.
I know many people have more questions and comment, but sadly we are running out of time. So before I conclude,
Yes.
Mr. Miyake, do you have any last words or comments you want to address the audience with?
Well, it's a great, great honor to be invited to this great building, great audience, great everything. I never dreamt of being here as a speaker. It was probably once in a lifetime honor for me, and I'd like to thank everybody here. And thank you.
Thank you, and it's our pleasure to have you here today. At the end, at the end of this lecture, and on behalf of His Excellency Professor Jamal Sanad Al-Suwaidi, the Director General of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, we would like to once again thank you, Mr. Miyake, for this lecture, as well as you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending the lecture, and hope to meet again in our future scientific events and lectures. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shukran.